Hi everyone, today I'm here to review in detail what may be the most hotly anticipated lens of the last 6 months or year, the new Tamron 15 to 30mm f2.8 with VC. Let's check it out. Now, as I said, there's a lot of people waiting on this review. I've been getting so many messages, and those messages have told me you want to see it compared. So I am going to be doing an in-depth testing of this lens on its own, plus throwing it head-to-head with the legendary Nikon 14 to 24. Before we get into all of that, let's go through and look at the specs of this guy and how it compares to the 14 to 24. The 15 to 30 is big and it's heavy. Tamron said they went for the scalpel of the 14 to 24 on this one, so no surprises. This one's 1.1 kilos, 10% heavier than the Nikon one. It's also over a centimeter longer at 145 millimeters. It does have full-time manual focus override. The manual focus band is fairly skinny, but the throw is quite good. Closest focusing is 28 centimeters, same as the Nikon. Both of the lenses stop down from 2.8 to 22. The Tamron has a total of 18 elements in 13 groups compared to 14 in 11 for the Nikon. They both have a rear weather sealing gasket and a splash resistant. They're both also big, heavy, and reasonably well balanced. Okay, some other highlights of this guy are it's coming in the Sony A mount. There hasn't been a lot of great lenses released for that lately, so Sony users can rejoice. Taking a look at the elements of this guy, it's got an expanded glass molded aspherical element, which is not as expensive as, say, a hand ground aspherical, but still that should really cut down on chromatic aberration, and they've designed that along with the low dispersion elements to help with sharpness and clear images. It's also got two different coatings on the front, E-band and B-bar, which are for colors and to reduce ghosting and flare. We'll test that and see how well they actually work. And first, it's got fluorine coating on the front element to help repel water and contaminants. So I'm actually going to do a test comparing it to the 14 to 24 and see if it is noticeably better. Finally, this guy has VC. Now, their 24 to 70 was the first one to have VC, and 15 to 30, I can't think of any that wide that have it. A lot of people say it's completely unnecessary on a wide angle. I think they may be missing the point. Maybe for your specific style of shooting, it doesn't help. But it can never hurt if it's well integrated. Let's say, before we test it, that this gives us 2 stops of effective compensation. If you were shooting in a situation where to get your depth of field, you needed f8, and then with your hand holding, you could only go as low as 1/30th of a second at, let's say, 30 mil or 20 mil, and then that meant that you had to be at ISO 3200, okay? If this is giving us 2 stops, we can drop our shutter speed from a 30th to a 15th to an 8th, and then we could be dropping our ISO from 3200 to 1600 to 800. Your resulting image quality, if the VC works, is going to be much higher with that lower ISO than you would at the higher ISO. That's why it's useful. The VC on their 24 to 70 and 70 to 200 are both outstanding, so we're definitely going to test that out. Enough talk, let's head out and do a bunch of different comparisons between these lenses and see how this one fares and if it is worth the $1,200 US price tag. Let's test focus speed on good contrast area. Here we are starting with the Tamron from infinity. Let's see how long it takes. Oh, there we go, it got it. And then from closest focus, again, good performance. Here with the Nikon, noticeably quicker though. Have to give it to the Nikon on both of those. Let's put them side by side. You can see the difference there. Okay, now let's try a much harder area to focus. As you can see, the Nikon is just completely failing to focus from closest or nearest. It's hunting but getting nothing. Putting it up against the Tamron in the same position, and the Tamron does take a little bit of time there, but it actually gets focus. A surprising result, if I'm honest. This is the contrast. We were focusing on the back of a curtain on a point that didn't have a lot of contrast, and there you can see the Tamron does get it, whereas the Nikon just hunts and can't get anything. Next, let's see if that new fluorine coating of the Tamron does anything. Note to aquaphobes or those who keep their gear in cotton wool, things are about to get a bit wet. Just 2 pumps of natural water onto the front element of each. Let's take a look. So you can see there, the Tamron definitely has expelled more of the water straight off the bat, and for whatever reason, the beading is a lot finer. Interesting. As we speed it up, you can see more is running off the Tamron, but it still hasn't cleaned up entirely. Let's give it a couple of good shakes each, and there you can see the Tamron is definitely cleaning up a lot better. And let's do it again, 5 good shakes in the sideways direction. Much cleaner on the Tamron. It certainly hasn't just, exited all the water 100%, but it cleaned up a lot quicker under the same conditions than the Nikon coating. Let's take a look at some test images. Here we are, this is a series taken, that's the full scene, and here we are in at 100% crops on the center of frame at 2.8, f4, looking down in the bottom left for the settings, f5.6, and then f8. The boat's certainly getting sharper as we go through, but switching back to 2.8, still a pretty decent result. Next up, I wanted to test flare and ghosting, and I had a lot of requests to show how its starburst is. New trend in landscape photography apparently is shooting straight at the sun. So let's go up through the apertures here, looking at the settings down in the bottom corner, and you can see how it looks. There is obvious flare coming through there, even there up at over f11. The sunburst, however, is really nice. And I've got to say that was really challenging conditions. Let's see how the 14-24 Nikon does in comparison. Taking a look at those 2 big bands on the left. Even as we go up through the aperture, they're still there. I'm really surprised. I knew it was a difficult challenge, but the Tamron smoked it. Let's put the watermarks up the top and compare them side by side. Just look at the difference between the 2 lenses. Astounding. Next up, let's take a look at vignetting. So here we are shot against a white wall. These are all the Tamron. By f4, it's looking good. 5, 6 is pretty much clear. f8 definitely clear. f11 just for interest's sake. And here we go with the 14-24 Nikon. They both are clearing up fairly well, but I think the Nikon probably has an edge from about f4. Next up, let's take a look at distortion. Look at that top line of brickwork. Obviously bowed, that's 15mm on the Tamron, but it's not too bad. Here by 24, it's cleared up. Let's take a look at the Nikon. Wow, at 14, obviously more, and at 24, they're both pretty clear, but let's stack them up side by side. There you've got the Nikon at the top at 15mm and the Tamron at the bottom at 15mm. Obvious differences, right? And then here we are at 24mm again. Next up, let's do one of my favorite tests to look at sharpness, contrast, and color fringing, shooting black and white text. There we are wide open with the new guy, and it's already outstanding. We really don't need to go too much further than that. The performance is really impressive. That said, let's look at the Nikon. It's also outstanding in terms of no color fringing, but I gotta say, at the wide open apertures, I think the Tamron's snappier in terms of contrast. Okay, let's test out some VC. This was with the VC off at 1/25th, 1/13th, 1/8th, not too bad. Even a third, and there things are getting too messy at a half. I'd say an 1/8 was about as far as I realistically got with that. Not too bad for an old fella. Now with the VC on, there we go, a 20th, 13th, 10th, a third, a half, and that's a full second, man. And that, I mean, it's not 100%, but it's as good as the other one was at an 1/8. And there we are at 2 seconds. Ridiculous. Now let's just split the difference and say it went from an 1/8 to a full second. So that's 3 full stops of effective compensation. In that scenario I said at the start, that would take you from 3200 down to 400 ISO. Of course, at that length, the bush may have moved. So here's one I shot of a sign as well. Crazy.
Okay, so what did you think, guys? I'm honestly really surprised. The Tamron 24-70 and 70-200 have stepped up their game immeasurably, and I was still surprised that they said that they would be going after the 14-24 with this lens. It's 60% of the price, it's, actually bigger, it's actually heavier, but looking at those different tests, I honestly didn't think it would reach the Nikon in any of the regards, but it actually did outperform it in some of them, which I'm gobsmacked. I redid some of the tests just to make sure. The VC is the most effective I've ever used for in-lens. There's some in-body ones out there that are just phenomenal. The fluorine seems to be working, the coating on the front. It's not, a miracle, but it certainly made a difference, and already the nanocrystal coating on Nikon is very good. On that point, the flaring was much better with the Tamron than the Nikon was able to achieve. There were just a bunch of different tests there that really stood out for me. In terms of hand holding and how they are to use, if you're used to the Nikon Holy Trinity, then you'll be familiar with this. It's got exactly the same feel. The Tamron feels like a better built version of their 24-70. It's noticeably better. I had no problem hand holding them. The Nikon may feel a little bit more robust because it does have some metal in the construction. Hands up if you've ever smashed a lens. Of course, I've broken everything. Now, I don't want to generalize to every Nikon to Canon lens out there, but I can tell you that I've smashed 3 24-70 Nikons in half by dropping them. Okay, and it's fairly well a metal lens. And I also dropped the Tamron 24-70, which bounced, flexed, and didn't break, and was still working fine because it's plastic. If you've ever seen inside a lens, they're not using some amazing, forged stainless steel. It's crappy composite metal. So, I'm not saying that that's a definitive conclusion, but high quality plastics aren't necessarily a downside to cheap metals. In other regards, which one should you buy? Well, I don't think the fair question is to say, is the Tamron better than the Nikon? Although arguably in many regards it is. You should be saying, is the image quality, handling and build quality 60% of the Nikon? Because it's adding that phenomenal VC, which does have application for a lot of people, to be able to get that slower shutter speed, to get a lower ISO. And 60%, I mean, even in the tests where the Nikon was ahead, like the vignetting, then it was not a 60%, a 40% lead. In some of the tests, the Tamron came out on top. I would say unless you want the best, you have the budget and you want all Nikon, the Tamron is better in at least half of the ways and very, very close on the others, and at 60% of the Nikon. I don't think I could recommend the Nikon over the Tamron, except, and this is a big except, if you need that extra mil wide, then you need it, and the Tamron isn't for you. If that 14 to 15 is going to be really important to you, and remember at that low end, that extra mil adds a lot of width, then the Nikon's the one for you. But if the 24 to 30, which is an extra 6 mil, so an extra 25% of length, will be more useful to you, then the Tamron is great. It gives you that overlap with your 24 to 70. For me, whilst there may be times that I'll miss that 14 to 15, a few shots a year, I'm sure the 24 to 30 is going to be more useful for me. So there you go. I'm truly surprised. I hope you found that useful. Please do check out all of my different social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and jump over to mattgranger.com, see what's going on and sign up for the mailing list. And let me know in the comments below and on my website, do you own either of these? Are you considering one of them? What are you going to shoot it with, and what are your overall impressions? I'd love to get your feedback. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you soon.